Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Stevens, and this is a lecture on themes in religious poetry to accompany Unit 4 in my course, Contemporary Religious Poetry. I'm going to talk about themes using this poem by Mary Carr, Disgrace Land, but I'd like to begin simply by talking about a challenge in a course like this, contemporary religious poetry. And let's just use Christianity as an example, although this principle, this challenge, if you will, certainly applies to other religions, Islam, Judaism, and so on. Any religion, any poetry in any of those religious traditions is going to present this challenge. And the challenge is simply a matter of religious knowledge. Okay, so let's put this up here. Um, we're just talking about the challenge of religious knowledge. If you are going to identify themes, religious themes in a religious poem, which of course is something that you need to do to fully understand the poem, if you're going to identify those themes, then you need some kind of knowledge of the religion itself. In a course like this, which is addressed to undergraduates everywhere, regardless of their own religion or their own non-religion, if you will, regardless of what they might know or not know about religion, um, the challenge for me as an instructor is to somehow make that poetry accessible. I cannot obviously give you any kind of full instruction in any religion, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Native American religions, whatever it might be. There is no place in a course like this for the kind of knowledge that you might need in order to understand the religion itself. So, with that said, um, I don't have any easy answer to that challenge. Right? So the challenge is how to understand a religious poem with without some knowledge of the religion represented in the poem, right? So the only answer I can give you is really two things. First of all, you are always free to ask me or anyone else in the course what something is. Something in the poem that seems to have something to do with religion. So let's just look at an example here right at the beginning of Mary Carr's poem, right? First communion. All right, so suppose you come across that first communion and you say, well, I don't know what a first communion is. You are certainly free to ask me and ask anybody else in the course. There are people in your discussion groups who understand these things. So you're free to ask. Second thing is you can always look things up online, but you can draw upon your own knowledge of religion. Most people have some understanding, some background in religion, even if they aren't church-going people themselves. So, for example, most people in the United States, most people I would imagine most people in the world have at least some familiarity with what with what Christmas is, okay? Or maybe even with Easter, those kinds of things. So there's going to be some general knowledge out there. The other thing is to try to figure things out from the context of the poem itself. That's not always easy, and it's going to depend upon the poem. So, for example, if you look at a poem like this, eventually you get to language that you say, okay, well, that seems to be associated with religion. Satan is a figure in religion, right? Eden, the Garden of Eden. Okay, we're getting then. Okay, so I get a reference to God, right? So some things that are going to be generally familiar will give you a context, and then finally you get fairly specific. All right, God is a concept, if you will, if you don't mind my calling it that. God is a concept that is found in most religions, right? So that's going to be familiar. Christ gets pretty specific because that is going to be Christianity, of course. So, anyway, what am I getting at? I'm simply saying that one of the tools that you can use in identifying religious themes is simply the context itself. But please don't be afraid to ask. If you've never heard of a First Communion before, ask me, ask somebody in your group, and we can take it from there. So let's read this poem with that idea as part of the background that your professor, I'm acknowledging that there is a challenge in identifying religious themes, in reading a religious poem, for the simple reason that some understanding of religious themes, some ability to identify religious themes is going to depend upon a certain amount of religious knowledge. And I wish I could give you all the religious knowledge you needed in order to understand the poems in this course, but I'm sorry to say I just can't do that. So, Disgrace Land by Mary Carr. By the way, please note this. This is not grace, it's disgrace. So that's going to be one of your first clues to a religious theme. Disgrace. How could disgrace and then the land, right? The land of disgrace. How could disgrace be related to a religious theme? Start with the title. Now, you may certainly see an allusion there to Graceland itself, which is, as many people know, the home of Elvis Presley, right? So Mary Carr may be wanting to bring in that allusion as somehow connected. I don't think that's necessary to understand this poem, but it's kind of a neat little trick that she's playing there. If she is playing off the name of the home of a famous singer, right? Okay. So, but this does have something to do with disgrace. So let's keep that in mind as we're looking for themes. But I'm just going to identify phrases here that I think clearly relate to themes in the poem. I clung to doubt. All right, doubt. Doubt in itself, this is very important. Doubt in itself is a religious theme. There are, of course, religious people, devout people in all religions who never doubt their religion, but it is very common. It is a part of religious experience to doubt the religion. One can be a practicing Muslim, a practicing Jew, a practicing Christian, and hold to the beliefs of those religions, and yet at the same time to experience doubt about those beliefs. So here is the speaker in this poem saying that she clung to doubt. Let's read the poem. Before my first communion, I clung to doubt as Satan, spider-like, stalked the orb of dark surrounding Eden for a wormhole into paradise. God had formed me from gel in my mother's womb, injected by my dad's smart chute. They swapped size until I came, smaller than a bite of burger. Quietly I grew till my lungs were done. Then the Lord sailed a soul like a lit arrow to inhabit me. Maybe that piercing made me howl at birth, or the masked creatures whose scalpel cut a lightning bolt to free me. I was hoisted by the heels and swatted, fed and hauled around. Time-lapse photos show my fingers grow past crayon outlines. My feet come to fill spiked heels. Eventually I lurched out to kiss the wrong mouths, get stewed, and sulk around. Christ always stood to one side with a glass of water. I swatted the sap away. When my thirst got great enough to ask, a clear stream welled up inside. Some jade wave buoyed me forward, and I found myself upright in the instant, with a garden inside my own ribs aflourish. There the arbor leaves, the vines push out plump grapes. You are loved, someone said. Take that and eat it. All right, so much going on here. And I know, this is a poem that you may remember from Unit 1 in the course, and I recall comments on this poem that indicated that people recognized, first of all, recognized a reference to conception, my dad's smart chute, meaning the sperm, which would then get into the or cause fertilization and so on, right? And then the embryo being implanted in the mother's womb, and then there were people who recognized the reference to birth here actually begins with, right, a reference to sex itself, right? They swapped size. All right, now I hope you can get the reference to the act of sex there. And then the references here to the birth process. The masked creatures would be the people in the delivery room who would be cutting the umbilical cord and so on, right? Okay. So all of this, and then references to infancy and growing up, right? You know those activities that we play with kids where we have them draw outlines of their fingers, right, on paper when they're little kids, and they take the crayon and they draw the outline, right, of their hands, and then you grow up, you become a teenager, and you get spike heel shoes, right? And of course, then you experiment with sex. You experiment with sex and you kiss the wrong mouths. And you experiment with booze and drugs and you get stewed, right? References to a conception, birth, infancy, growing up, and sulking around, which is something that teenagers do. Okay, now here's where a little bit of religious knowledge I think is very helpful in understanding this poem. My first communion. In the Catholic Church, the first communion, meaning where you get the bread and you get the wine that represent the Last Supper of Christ, right? That first communion, let's see what happens if I do this. Okay, right. That first communion happens at confirmation. And confirmation, which is the ritual, if you will, the ritual in which an individual, a young individual, confirms his or her faith, usually happens in the early teen years, maybe around the age of 12, 13, somewhere around there. So it's going to happen in early teen years when, as a lot of teenagers do, there's a lot of sulking around, right? Okay. So let's take this, eat it. Now, eat it is a very, very powerful expression that we use in so many contexts, right? So eating it could be, having to deal with a very unpleasant experience. Okay, that's life. You just got to suck it up. You got to eat it, right? That kind of reference. Um, and there is some of that connotation in Carr's use of that phrase, eat it here, right? Okay, you just got to eat dirt. You've got to eat humiliation. You've got to eat perhaps disgrace, right? But very clearly, there is the reference to the act of communion in which the participant eats the bread of Christ. All right? So the words, what we call sometimes the words of administration, you go up to the altar, as it were, and you are offered the bread in the form, say, of a wafer. And the words of administration include the words take and eat. This is my body which is given for you. Eat this in remembrance of me. Okay? So eat this. Eat it, eat this in remembrance of me. So we have the theme here, not just of communion itself, which is that's an act, that's a religious act that people participate in. But we have the theme, where'd he go? We have the theme of Christ somehow offering something, offering himself to the person who believes in Christ. So, theme. Let's put these down here. So, themes. Number one, let's just call it God. God offers something, right? Now, what is God offering? God is, if you want to take the larger general context of the communion, God is offering the body of Christ, right? But in this particular poem, Christ is offering a glass of water, meaning Christ is offering something to quench somebody's thirst. Okay? So, to quench a thirst. So that leads us to the second theme. And by the way, this particular theme, the thirst for God, is something that is universal in religion. It is certainly not unique to Christianity. It's just that in Christianity, the answer to that thirst for God is, of course, the living water that Christ offers, and that Christ offers also in communion, in that act of communion. But let's get back to this idea of doubt. All right, I clung to doubt, which I said was a major theme here. So, doubt. And I said that also, like the thirst for God, is a, oh, come on, universal theme in religion. And in this poem, how is that doubt? I'd love to talk about Satan here in paradise and the wormhole and so on, but we just don't have time, folks. All right. But once you get to the end of the poem and you get to Christ and you get to that reference to communion, then you go back to this first line and you say, ah, before my first communion, I clung to doubt, religious doubt. Before my first communion. So, what does that tell you? That tells you that one of the answers to doubt is and lots of ways we could refer to this, but let's just call it in general feeding on Christ or God. Because there's that whole reference at the end to the communion, to the feeding, to the quenching of thirst that occurs in communion. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. You probably didn't think this lecture would ever come to an end, right? Okay, so what do you do? I've identified 4 themes here, and they're all related, okay? I've identified 4 themes here. The work that you're going to be doing in Unit 1 is simply to identify one theme. You don't have to identify all the themes in a poem. And by the way, there are far more themes than just these in this particular poem, all right? So let's just put that down, put that out there for a good measure. Many themes in most poems, right? You need to identify only one. And then what have I done here? I have given you examples of themes. Okay, and so I'm going to end this lecture by saying I hope this has made some sense to you, and I'm just going to wish you good luck finding religious themes. Thanks for listening, folks, and I will see you in discussion.